I had always loved nature. Hiking in the woods made me feel alive. So when my friend Sarah invited me to go camping in the forest near our town, I was excited. She told me it was a beautiful place, perfect for a weekend getaway. On Friday evening, we drove to the forest. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow through the trees. We parked the car and gathered our gear. Sarah had brought a tent, sleeping bags, and food. I carried a backpack with water, snacks, and a flashlight. As we walked into the forest, the trees stood tall and thick, their leaves rustling gently in the breeze. The air was fresh and smelled of pine. We followed a narrow path, laughing and chatting, enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. After about an hour of hiking, we found a nice clearing beside a small stream. It was the perfect spot to set up camp. We pitched the tent and made a small fire to cook our dinner. The crackling sound of the fire and the soft glow warmed the night. After dinner, we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories. The woods were quiet except for the sounds of the crackling fire and the occasional rustle of leaves. I started to feel a bit uneasy, as if something was watching us. But I brushed it off, telling myself it was just the dark forest playing tricks on my mind. As the night grew darker, we decided to turn in. I crawled into the tent, trying to ignore the strange sounds outside. Sarah was already asleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. I lay there listening to the wind and the whispers of the trees. Then I heard something else, a soft whispering sound, like someone was talking just outside the tent. I held my breath, straining to listen. The voices were faint, almost like they were calling my name. Am I just imagining things? I thought. I shook my head, trying to clear my mind. I told myself it was probably the wind, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The silence felt heavy, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I wanted to get out of the tent to see what was happening, but I was too scared. I pulled the sleeping bag over my head and tried to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up to a strange noise, a thump, like something heavy had fallen near our camp. My heart raced as I listened carefully. I could hear footsteps outside, crunching leaves and twigs. Someone or something was moving around. I took a deep breath and mustered the courage to unzip the tent. Slowly, I peeked outside. The fire was just embers now, glowing softly. The forest was dark, and I could barely see anything. "Sarah?" I whispered, hoping she was awake. But there was no response. I crawled out of the tent and looked around. The trees loomed over me, their shadows twisting in the dim light. I called her name again, louder this time. "Sarah, are you there?" Still no answer. I felt a knot in my stomach. I had to find her. I stepped away from the tent, trying to listen for any sounds. The forest was eerily quiet. I walked towards the stream, thinking maybe she had gone there. As I reached the water, I saw something move in the shadows. My heart skipped a beat. I squinted, trying to see what it was. Then I heard a soft whisper again, calling my name. "Help me." I felt a chill wash over me. It sounded like Sarah's voice, but something was off. I took a step closer to the sound, my heart racing. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Help me." The voice echoed again, more desperate this time. I followed the sound, stepping cautiously over rocks and fallen branches. The darkness surrounded me, making it hard to see. I felt my way through the trees, feeling lost and afraid. The whisper led me deeper into the forest, away from our camp. I called out for Sarah, but all I heard in response was the whispering wind. The air felt thick and heavy, and I began to doubt if I was even going in the right direction. "Sarah!" I shouted again, panic rising in my chest. "Help me!" The voice was clearer now, and it sounded like it was coming from behind a large tree. I hurried towards it, hoping to finally find my friend. When I reached the tree, I looked around, but there was nothing, just darkness and silence. I felt a knot in my stomach as fear took hold. I took a deep breath and turned back toward the direction of our camp. But as I turned, I realized I couldn't see the path I had taken. The trees all looked the same, and I felt lost. My heart raced as I called out for Sarah again, but this time there was no whisper in return. I stumbled back, trying to retrace my steps, but everything felt different. The trees were taller, the shadows deeper. I felt like I was in a maze, and panic set in. I had to find my way back before it was too late. Suddenly, I heard a rustling noise behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly turned around, and there, just a few feet away, was a figure. It was tall and dark, standing among the trees, watching me. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. Fear gripped me, and I took a step back, my instincts screaming for me to run. But I couldn't move. I felt like I was frozen in place. "Help me." The voice came again, but this time, it was not Sarah's voice. It was deeper, echoing through the trees, sending chills down my spine. Without thinking, I turned and ran. I dashed through the trees, branches scratching at my arms and face. I didn't stop to look back. I just wanted to get away from that voice, from that figure watching me. I ran and ran, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The forest felt alive, the shadows closing in around me. I could hear the whispers again, filling my ears. They were getting louder, echoing my name, and I felt like I was losing my mind. "Help me! Help me!" they chanted, and I stumbled, almost falling over a root. I fought to keep my balance and pressed on, desperate to escape. Finally, I burst into a small clearing. I stopped, panting, and looked around. I could see the outline of the tent in the distance. I wasn't far from our camp. I ran towards it, relief flooding through me. But as I got closer, I froze again. The tent was empty. There was no sign of Sarah. My heart sank, and a wave of fear washed over me. "Sarah!" I shouted again, but there was no answer. I searched the area around the tent, calling her name, but all I heard was the whispering wind and the rustle of leaves. The forest felt like it was closing in on me, and I felt a deep sense of dread. Suddenly, I heard the voice again, but it was different this time. It was angry, echoing through the trees. "You shouldn't have come here." I looked around, but there was no one there. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized the forest was alive with something dark and sinister. I took a step back, feeling the weight of something watching me. Then I heard a crash behind me, like something big had fallen. I turned to see a large tree limb snap and fall to the ground. The forest was alive with sounds I couldn't explain, and panic took over. I ran again, pushing my way through the trees. I needed to get out. I couldn't think of anything but escaping. The whispers followed me, growing louder, filling my mind with fear. "Help me," they chanted, and I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart racing. I felt lost, alone, and terrified. Finally, I broke through the trees and found myself on a dirt road. I could see the car parked in the distance, and I sprinted towards it. I reached the car and fumbled for the keys, my hands shaking. I unlocked the door and jumped inside, slamming it shut. I started the engine, my heart pounding. I glanced back at the forest, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadow move among the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't stay here any longer. I put the car in gear and drove away, my heart still racing. As I left the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers faded into the background, but they lingered in my mind. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. I parked the car in a gas station lot, my hands still trembling. I needed to calm down and gather my thoughts. As I stepped out of the car, the sun was rising. The light illuminated the road, but the shadows of the forest loomed in the distance. I could still hear the whispers, echoing in my mind, and I knew I would never return to that forest again. I learned that day that some places are better left unexplored, that some secrets should remain buried in the darkness. I would always remember the forest of whispers and the voice that called for help. One sunny Saturday morning, my friends and I decided to go hiking in the old forest behind our town. We had heard stories about the forest being haunted, but we were excited to explore. "Are you sure about this place?" I asked my friends, feeling a bit scared. "Don't be a chicken," said Sarah. "It's just a forest, we'll have fun." So, I agreed, even though I felt a little uneasy. We packed our backpacks with snacks, water, and a flashlight just in case. We set off toward the forest, laughing and joking along the way. Part 2. Entering the forest. As we entered the forest, the trees seemed to close in around us. The sunlight peeked through the leaves, creating strange shadows on the ground. I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. "It's beautiful in here," Tom said, looking up at the tall trees. "It is," I replied, but I still felt something was off. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We walked deeper into the forest, enjoying the sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling. But after a while, the cheerful sounds faded and the forest grew quiet. Part 3. The Whispers. Suddenly, I heard a soft whisper. "Help me." It sounded like a woman's voice. I stopped and looked at my friends. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Hear what?" Sarah replied, looking confused. "It sounded like someone is calling for help," I said, but they just laughed. "You're imagining things." We continued walking, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The whispering grew louder, echoing around us. "Help me, please." "Guys, we should turn back," I suggested. "Don't be silly. We're almost to the old cabin," Tom said, still eager to go on. Part 4. The Cabin. After a while, we finally reached the cabin. It was old and creepy, with broken windows and vines growing all over it. I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Let's check it out," Tom exclaimed. "No way, it looks dangerous," I protested. "Come on, it'll be fun," Sarah said, pulling me toward the cabin. Reluctantly, I followed them inside. The air was cold, and the floor creaked under our feet. Inside, there was dusty furniture and cobwebs everywhere. As we explored, I noticed strange drawings on the walls. They looked like warnings. "Get out," one of them said. I felt a sense of dread wash over me. "Guys, we should really leave," I said, my voice trembling. "Just a few more minutes," Tom insisted, looking around excitedly. Part 5. The Shadows. Suddenly the door slammed shut. We all jumped. "What was that?" Sarah cried, panic in her eyes. "Tom, open the door," I yelled. He rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge. "It's stuck," he shouted, pulling with all his might. I could hear the whispering again, louder this time. "Help me. Help Ewas." "Who is Tia?" he asked, feeling scared. "I don't know," Tom replied, looking around nervously. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift and move, and I felt like something was in the cabin with us. Part 6. The Escape. I was terrified. "We need to get out of here," I screamed. Just then the whispers turned into a wailing sound. "Leave now," they cried. The shadows grew darker, creeping closer to us. I felt a strong urge to run. "Let's try the windows," I shouted. We all rushed to the windows, but they were too high to reach. The wailing became louder, filling the cabin with fear. "Stay together," Tom shouted. "We can find a way out." We huddled together, looking for an escape. I spotted a small window in the back. "There," I pointed. "Help me boost you up," Tom said, crouching down. I climbed on Tom's back and reached for the window. I managed to grab the edge and pull myself up. Just as I was about to squeeze through, I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. "Help!" I screamed, panic flooding my mind. Part 7. The Forest's Secret. With one last effort, I kicked free and fell outside, landing on the ground. I quickly turned around, and to my horror, I saw a shadowy figure in the window. reaching for me. "Get out of here," I yelled to my friends, who were still inside. Tom and Sarah finally broke free and jumped through the door, running toward me. We all sprinted away from the cabin, the whispers still following us. We ran through the trees, not stopping until we reached the edge of the forest. When we finally stopped, we were all panting, hearts racing. "What was that?" Sarah gasped, looking back at the forest. "I don't know," I replied, trembling. "But we have to tell someone." Part 8. The warning. Once we were safely back in town, we rushed to the local sheriff's office. We told them everything that happened in the forest. The sheriff listened carefully, his face growing serious. "I've heard stories about that cabin," he said. "Many people have gone missing in those woods over the years. They say the spirits of those who got lost still wander there, trying to find a way home." "Spirits?" I whispered, feeling chills run down my spine. "Yes," the sheriff replied. "You were lucky to escape. Stay away from the whispering woods." From that day on, I never went back to the forest. The whispers haunted my dreams, and I could never forget the shadowy figure in the cabin. Sometimes, I would walk by the edge of the forest, and I would hear the faint whispers calling out, "Help us, please." But I knew better than to go back. The whispering woods were not a place for people like us. They held secrets best left alone. It was a bright Saturday morning when my friend Mike invited me to hike in the forest. He said it was a great place to explore. I felt excited but also a bit nervous. I had heard some spooky stories about this forest. People said it was haunted, but Mike didn't believe in ghosts. "Come on, it'll be fun," he said with a big smile. "Okay," I replied, trying to sound brave. We packed our backpacks with snacks, water, and a map. As we drove to the forest, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. The trees grew taller as we entered the forest, their branches stretching out like long fingers. Part 2. Entering the forest. When we arrived, the forest was quiet. The sunlight peeked through the leaves, making the ground sparkle. It looked beautiful, but something felt off. I took a deep breath and tried to relax. "Let's go," Mike said, walking ahead. I followed him, but I kept looking around, feeling like someone was watching us. We walked on a narrow path surrounded by tall trees. As we went deeper into the forest, the sounds of birds and animals faded away. It became eerily silent. I felt a chill in the air, and my heart began to race. "Do you feel that?" I asked Mike. "Feel what?" he replied, looking confused. "It feels strange here," I said, glancing back at the dark trees behind us. "Don't be silly. It's just a forest," he laughed. Part 3. The old cabin. After a while, we came across an old cabin hidden among the trees. It looked creepy and worn down, with a broken roof and cracked windows. "Let's check it out," Mike said, running toward the cabin. I hesitated. "I don't know, Mike. It looks dangerous." "Come on, it'll be fun," he insisted. Reluctantly, I followed him inside. The air was cold and musty, and the floor creaked under our feet. Inside, we saw old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. "Look at this," Mike said, pointing to a strange symbol carved into the wooden wall. "What does it mean?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "I don't know, but it's cool," he replied, taking a picture with his phone. Part. The whispers. As we explored the cabin, I heard a faint sound. It was a soft whisper, almost like someone was calling out, "Help me." I froze and turned to Mike. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" he asked, looking at me with a puzzled expression. "It sounded like someone needs help," I said, my voice shaking. Mike laughed again. "You're just imagining things. It's probably the wind." But I wasn't sure. The whisper seemed to echo in my ears, growing louder. "Help me, please." Feeling scared, I suggested we leave the cabin. But Mike wanted to stay. "Let's just look around a bit longer," he said. Part 5. The shadows move. Suddenly, the whispers turned into a wailing sound. "Get out! Leave now!" I felt panic rising in my chest. "Mike, we need to go, now!" But he was still looking around, his back turned to me. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him toward the door. "Come on!" I shouted. Just then, the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift. I felt a cold breeze rush past me, and the temperature dropped. "What's happening?" I gasped, looking around. Part 6. The Escape. The door slammed shut, and we both jumped. "It won't open," Mike yelled, pulling on the doorknob. "Let's try the windows," I suggested. We rushed to the windows, but they were too high. I felt the walls closing in around us. The wailing grew louder, and the shadows seemed to dance closer. "Help! Somebody help us!" I screamed, feeling desperate. "Just calm down," Mike shouted, but his voice trembled. I turned around, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure in the corner. It was dark and twisted, with glowing eyes staring at us. I screamed and backed away. "What is that?" Part 7. Out into the forest. We pushed against the door one last time, and it suddenly flew open. We rushed out into the forest, gasping for air. The whispers followed us, echoing in the trees. "Run!" I shouted, and we sprinted down the path, not looking back. The trees seemed to close in around us, and I could feel the shadows reaching for us. I didn't know where we were going, but I just wanted to escape. Part 8. Back to safety. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest. We burst out into the sunlight, panting and shaking. "Did that really just happen?" Mike asked, looking pale. "I don't know," I replied, still feeling the fear in my heart. "But I'm never going back there again." We walked back to the car in silence, the whispers fading behind us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see the shadows lurking in the trees. Part 9. The Aftermath. Once we were safely in the car, I locked the doors. "Let's go home," I said, my voice shaking. As we drove away, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. But deep down, I knew I would never forget what happened in that forest. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers would return. I thought about the old cabin and the figure we saw. I felt like the forest was still watching us. Days turned into weeks, and I tried to forget about that day. But sometimes, when the wind blew outside, I thought I could hear the whispers again. "Help us, please." I told my friends about the experience, but they just laughed it off. "You're being dramatic," they said. "It's just a story." But I knew what I had felt. I knew the forest held secrets, and some things were better left alone. Part 10. The Warning. One evening, a week after our hike, I decided to visit the local library. I wanted to learn more about the forest. As I searched for books, I found an old book with the title, Legends of the Haunted Forest. I opened it and began to read. The stories were chilling. They spoke of people who disappeared in the forest, never to be seen again. The whispers were said to be the voices of those lost souls, forever searching for help. I felt a chill run down my spine. I quickly closed the book and left the library. I never went back to the forest, and I never forgot the experience. The forest was not just trees and dirt. It was alive with memories and shadows. Some nights, I still hear the whispers when the wind blows. But now, I know better than to listen. The forest has its secrets, and I intend to stay far away from them.